Hello and welcome to Euronews Tonight. Let's take a look at the latest headlines. Protesters try to storm City Hall in Almaty as Kazakhstan declares a state of emergency over escalating unrest that spread to several cities.
Amid a nationwide internet outage, the country's president vows a robust response. We'll have more details here in the Cube.
As tensions continue between Ukraine and Russia, the EU's foreign affairs chief vows the bloc's full support for Kiev. President Macron says he wants to make life increasingly difficult for unvaccinated people, as anger over his comments delays a debate in Parliament over the controversial vaccine pass. And we go to Novi Sad in Serbia to see what the city, one of this year's 3 European capitals of culture, has to offer. Welcome to the programme. Kazakhstan's president has dismissed the government and declared a state of emergency. It comes as violent demonstrations escalate across the country, with protesters attempting to storm the city hall in the main city, Almaty. The country has faced days of rare demonstrations following a surge in the price of natural gas. Well, Matthew and our team in the Cube have been following the latest developments.
Indeed, Rue. Tear gas, stun grenades and government buildings being stormed. These demonstrations in Kazakhstan are certainly unprecedented in a country where any public gathering requires the prior permission of the authorities. For days now, these latest protests have broken out after an increase in the price of liquefied natural gas. It's something that many people in Kazakhstan rely on as their main source of fuel, and there are concerns that the lifting of price caps could also lead to an increase in food prices, and public anger has now spilled out onto the streets of Kazakhstan. Have a look at this video that was shared on Telegram by Order. It's an independent news organisation in Kazakhstan. You can see the protesters on their way to the government buildings in Almaty have overturned and set fire to a police vehicle. Other images on social media have shown anti-government slogans being chanted and even statues to the country's influential former president being toppled. In a statement on Tuesday, the Interior Ministry of Kazakhstan confirmed that at least 200 people had been detained for violating public order, while more than 95 police officers had been injured. Now, the country's president, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, has said that he was calling for calm earlier in the day in a Facebook video, pledging the country did not need any conflict or provocation. However, in a later televised address, the president also said that he would act robustly against any people taking part in these demonstrations. But information about what is happening on the ground in Kazakhstan is still very difficult to ascertain, because as you can see here, as identified by NetBlocks, the country is currently experiencing a nationwide internet outage. Major popular social media platforms like WhatsApp, Telegram and Signal are suffering restrictions, and even the president's own personal website has also gone down. And Ruud, this makes it difficult not just for the authorities to communicate, but also those people taking part in the demonstrations. It means they are less able to upload videos of the protests online, but also, Ruud, it means they are less able to communicate on social media and express their own discontent about the political course in Kazakhstan.
Thanks, Matt. The European Union's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, is visiting Ukraine as tensions with Russia over its military buildup near the Ukrainian border remain high. Borrell was in the country's eastern border region, where clashes between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists continue to take place. The visit comes less than a week before the US and NATO are due to hold talks with Russian officials. Borrell said any talks about European security must involve the EU and reiterated Brussels' support for Kiev.
There is no security in Europe without the security of Ukraine. And it is clear that any discussion on European security must include the European Union and Ukraine. Any discussion about Ukraine must involve Ukraine. That's why we are in a strong coordination with the US, NATO and other like-minded countries, and that explains, apart from the will of expressing our support to Ukraine, my presence here today.
For more on this, let's cross over to Maeve McMahon in Brussels. Maeve, Boris is calling for de-escalation, and Ukrainian foreign minister is echoing those calls. But what pressure can either side apply to Russia?
Good evening. Well, the European Union is, of course, a soft power. It can use diplomacy, like it always does on the world stage, in order to put pressure, in this case, on Vladimir Putin and on the regime in Russia. And that's exactly why Joseph Borrell is in Ukraine today for a two-day visit, is in Luhansk, because this show of unity and showing that he's sitting there side by side along with the Ukrainian foreign minister is already quite disturbing for Vladimir Putin to look, because, as you know, Ukraine wants to join the European Union. It aspires as well to join NATO, the military alliance, and that's something that Vladimir Putin does not want. And in fact, it's one of the red lines that Putin will be bringing, or his officials will be bringing, to those meetings taking place in Geneva with the Americans in order to discuss the situation along the border there. And of course, another tool that the European Union can use is sanctions. Take a listen now to the Ukrainian Foreign Minister speaking today, Dmitry Kuleba.
We are systematically working to contain the Russian Federation, and undoubtedly one of the elements of this containment package is the preparation of new, painful sanctions for Russia.
And for his part, the EU's Foreign Affairs Chief Joseph Borrell stressed once again that if Moscow did decide to invade Ukraine, if they did go ahead with that three-phase plan that has been reported and use those 100,000 troops that appear to be ready for war, there would be dire consequences for Russia that would come at a very, very high cost.
The EU is being sidelined in the upcoming talks between NATO and the US and Russian officials in the coming week. But Brussels can't be happy about being left out in the cold.
Absolutely. Nobody likes being left out in the cold, especially officials from the building behind me, the EEAS, the European Union's foreign service that was set up, in fact, and established back in the Lisbon Treaty in order to give the European Union foreign policy clout on the world stage. But as we've seen from the last couple of days, and the fact that Putin will hold those talks in Geneva just with the Americans, snubbing the Europeans, it means that the European Union as a whole does not have any clout when it comes to foreign policy, and it remains very divided when it comes to its stance on Russia, and of course as well on the future of its security policy. But it is of course worth pointing out that the phone lines between Washington DC and Brussels do remain open. Consultations are very much ongoing about the situation in Ukraine, and a meeting will take place as well by NATO on Friday, a virtual meeting, and 21 EU members are of course NATO members, and tomorrow we'll see officials from the new German government and from the French government heading to Moscow for talks hosted by Vladimir Putin in the Normandy format.
Maeve, thanks for that update. Now, returning to our top story on Kazakhstan, let's head to London and join Kate Mallinson. She's an Associate Fellow at the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Good evening. Is the government capable of taking back control? And has this crisis been triggered by more than just fuel prices?
Yes, I mean, we're very much reaching an inflection point today with regard to whether the government is capable of taking back control. I think tonight we will see the government trying to enforce the state of emergency that it imposed on regions within the country, and just within the last half an hour on the whole country tonight, to try and restore some order to the country. The government has made some policy concessions to the protesters, but as this protest movement is about much more than the actual rise in fuel prices that were announced on the 1st of January, it's going to be very difficult for the government to address the myriad grievances that we see coming today. And those are both political and socioeconomic in nature, but they relate to kind of long-term structural changes within the Kazakh political economy, which will be very hard to address in the short term. And so far, they haven't appeased the demonstrators in any shape or form.
Could this escalate to the levels we've seen in Belarus? And how closely are neighbouring states following the events?
I think the other Central Asian states will be watching Kazakhstan very closely. But these countries, although they were all under the kind of post-Soviet yoke, they differ substantially from each other. And what we saw in Belarus is very different to what we see in Kazakhstan. And the main problem facing Kazakhstan today is the fact that over the last 30 years, the Kazakh government has decimated the systemic opposition or any attempts to have a systemic opposition in the country. And so now this movement we see is very amorphous, it's very grassroots, and there is no leadership with which the Kazakh government can actually negotiate to try and quell the protests, to try and come to some agreement to stop the movements.
Russia is a long-standing ally of Kazakhstan, and Moscow has already said it's monitoring the situation. Could we see further aid coming from the Kremlin?
Aid's an interesting way to term it. Shortly before I came on air, I saw that there are reports that the Russians are sending their Spetsnaz, their special forces, to Aktau in western Kazakhstan. Of course, there is a lot of disinformation, and truth is the first casualty. But Russia is playing a key role in what is happening behind the scenes, particularly with the West and Russia at loggerheads at the moment. Kazakhstan is seen as one of Russia's key allies. And Putin and Nazarbayev, the first president of Kazakhstan, very much respect each other. And as we know, Putin loathes coloured revolutions, and he will not let this happen on his southern flank.
Kate Mallinson, thank you for speaking to Euronews. The UK has reported almost 195,000 new COVID cases in the last 24 hours. It comes as the Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that England would not go further with restrictions. Instead, he'll stick with Plan B for a further 3 weeks. That includes mask wearing, working from home, and COVID passes for larger venues. During Prime Minister's questions, he also confirmed that he's dropping the need in England for a PCR test following a positive lateral flow test, if asymptomatic.
This government does not believe we need to shut down our country again. Instead, we are taking a balanced approach, using the protection of the boosters and the Plan B measures to reduce the spread of the virus, while acting to strengthen our NHS, protect critical national services and keep our supply chains open.
Responding to Boris Johnson, Angela Rayner, who was standing in for the Labour leader Keir Starmer, called for a frank assessment of the state of the NHS.
Prime Minister has said we have to ride out this Omicron wave, but the NHS isn't surfing. It's struggling to stay afloat. We've now seen several hospital trusts declare critical incidents, meaning they are unable to provide services for cancer and heart disease patients. Getting testing right remains the best way to avoid further restrictions. It's welcome that the government is requiring daily testing to protect critical national infrastructure, but this won't begin until next week, and our essential services are buckling under the pressure right now.
Well, for more on this, I'm now joined from London by David Chazan. David, more than a dozen NHS trusts in the UK have declared being in a critical condition. How under pressure has the PM been over not going further on Plan B and riding the Omicron wave?
Well, many members of the public did want tougher restrictions, but Boris Johnson's under a lot of pressure from members of his own party not to go any further. Now, last month, when he tried to introduce COVID passes for large public venues, he faced a big parliamentary rebellion from members of his own Conservative Party. So his credibility has also been damaged by allegations of illegal Downing Street parties during previous lockdowns. His popularity has been collapsing, and all this makes it extremely difficult for the Prime Minister to introduce tougher restrictions. So he's taking a bit of a gamble on this. He's hoping that the NHS, the Britain's health service, will hold up under the pressure. It certainly is suffering, with a lot of staff who are isolating or who have caught COVID. And at least 17 hospitals have already cancelled non-urgent surgeries. So I think it's fair to say that Boris Johnson is now under pressure, perhaps as never before, and this is a far cry from 2 years ago when he won the largest Conservative parliamentary majority since Margaret Thatcher. Now pundits are speculating about how much longer he can last in Downing Street.
David Chazan, thanks for that update. In France, a parliamentary debate on the controversial vaccine pass has resumed. It was delayed over anger about President Emmanuel Macron's comments on unvaccinated people. Macron used strong language to explain how he wants to make life difficult for those not willing to get vaccinated. Opposition lawmakers said his words weren't appropriate for a president. Some have demanded an apology. Well, for more on this, we're joined from Paris by our international correspondent, Annalise Borges. So, Annalise, did President Macron's comments help or hinder the debate and the passing of the vaccine pass?
Well, there was widespread condemnation for Emmanuel Macron's choice of words. The French president used an expression, emmerder les Français, which is very close to a word you might have heard before here in France, the word merde, which is, of course, a very vulgar word. And today in Parliament, MPs went even further and described Emmanuel Macron's statement as disrespectful and hurtful and summoned France's Prime Minister to explain what the government's strategy here really is with this vaccine pass. Is it to save lives? Is it to protect the French? Or is it to piss them off? Jean Castex stood by the French president's remarks, saying that what is really important here is to save lives, and that is no insult to recall the difficulty that the unvaccinated represent to the state and to healthcare personnel. He asked politicians to focus on what was really important and to resume the debate and the vote on that vaccine pass. Some 5 million people here in France have not received a first dose of the jab, and the French government's focus recently has been to ask everyone to go and get a jab, get a shot. The French administration has been saying that that is the only weapon they have in this fight. But this has sparked a debate here in this country over individual freedoms versus collective responsibility. And while many believe this legislation would pass very swiftly and easily in Parliament, since Emmanuel Macron's camp still has the majority there, well, things really did not go as planned. Rue?
France looks likely to report nearly 335,000 cases today. How are the hospitals coping?
Well, French hospitals are bracing for a significant rise in the number of admissions in the coming days and weeks. According to government figures, over 3,600 people are currently being treated for COVID-19 in ICUs across the country. And the problem here, Rue, is France still only has about 5,500 beds in ICU. That's the same number that we had in the start of the pandemic, despite government pledges to triple that capacity. So what's been happening here is that facilities around the country have been triggering what it's called in France a white plan. That is when they cancel or postpone non-urgent interventions to free up space. Add to that, that point actually, across the Paris region, all hospitals have already adopted the white plan for about a month now. Add to that the fact that many hospital personnel are now absent, are not showing up for work because they have themselves tested positive for COVID-19, and you have a very tense situation, in the words of a doctor I just spoke to a couple of moments ago. He said that they are worried, that they are very concerned, and that they are bracing for things to get significantly worse during the course of the month of January.
Thanks, Annalise. Novi Sad in Serbia is one of 3 cities to be given the title European Capital of Culture 2022. It's known for its summer festival, unique history and architecture. Natasha Kovachev reports now on what's in store for culture lovers in the city this year.
It entered the year of the title with an homage to famous scientists and artists, with the lights illuminating its historical heritage and new bridges. One of the slogans for the project that puts culture in the center of social and economic development.
The program for New Bridges tells the story about Europe and Novi Sad from the angle of identities, but also using current European topics, problems and challenges. This range of investment in the area of culture didn't occur in the previous 50 years or so in Novi Sad.
Using the potentials it has in old industrial complexes, the new European Capital of Culture turns them into gallery spaces, art studios and theatre stages, where part of the programs will take place. New address for classical music concerts will be the City Concert Hall. Together with the European title, it brought the world-famous violinist Stefan Milenkovic to Novi Sad.
I'm here because of my family and because it is a challenge for me to participate directly in the life of classical music in Serbia. One of the key factors is, of course, a phenomenal creative climate.
In that climate, cultural institutions and independent artists were called to become part of what the organizers call the beginning of transformation of Novi Sad. In 2022, through festivals, exhibitions, theatre plays, concerts, this city will focus on questions like migrations, the future of Europe, female creativity, the importance of peace. More than 4,000 artists will be part of the European Capital of Culture. Novi Sad will host over 1,500 events this year, hoping it will boost the number of tourists in the city again, after 2 years affected by the pandemic of coronavirus. Natasha Kovacev, Euronews, Novi Sad.
That's all from Euronews tonight, but do stay tuned for more news coming up.